All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're going deep, really deep into the origins of the Ottoman Empire.
The Ottomans.
Exactly. And we're focusing on, you guessed it, Osman I.
The big guy. The one who started it all.
The OG Ottoman, right? And you send over some fascinating excerpts from his Wikipedia page.
Lots of juicy details there.
But here's the thing, and this is what I find so intriguing. There's surprisingly little solid information about Osman from his actual lifetime. It's like a historical black hole.
Yeah, it's a bit like trying to put together a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing.
Exactly. So how do we even begin to unravel the story of someone so crucial to history when the sources are so thin? Where do we even start?
Well, we have to start with what we do know. The Ottoman tradition, the stories they told about themselves, claim that Osman's family came from the Kayya tribe, a group of Oghuz Turks.
Okay, so we have a starting point, a lineage. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
But, and there's always a but, right? Modern scholars are pretty skeptical of this claim. They see it as a possible invention, maybe even propaganda, to make the Ottomans seem more impressive, give them a more noble origin story.
So right off the bat, we're dealing with image and political spin. It makes you wonder what else might have been embellished over time.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just the lineage. Even Osman's name is up for debate.
Really?
Yeah, some scholars believe his original name was Atman, or maybe Ataman, a more Turkish name.
And the Arabic Osman came later.
Exactly. Possibly adopted for political reasons, to appeal to a wider audience. It all points to a carefully crafted image, something we see time and time again with powerful figures.
It's a good reminder that history is rarely a straightforward account. There's always more beneath the surface. But before we get too deep into the image making, I think it's important to set the stage. What was going on in 13th century Anatolia? What was the world like that allowed someone like Osman to rise to power?
Well, imagine a region in complete turmoil. The once mighty Seljuk Sultanate, the big power in Anatolia for centuries, was falling apart.
Crumbling.
Yeah, crumbling. You've got the Mongols pressing in from the east, and all these smaller beyliks, these independent Turkish principalities, all fighting for control.
Sounds like a recipe for chaos.
Oh, it was absolute chaos.
Yeah.
A really dangerous time to be alive.
So not exactly a stable environment. It sounds like Osman had his work cut out for him just to survive, let alone build an empire. So how did he do it? What were the key ingredients to his success?
Well, he was definitely a skilled warrior, no doubt about that.
A real battlefield commander.
But Osman's rise was about more than just brute force. He was incredibly smart, a brilliant strategist, and a master at playing the political game.
So he wasn't just reacting to events, he was shaping them to his advantage.
Exactly. He was always thinking a few steps ahead.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of moves was he making?
Take his relationship with the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire. They controlled a lot of the territory Osman wanted to conquer. Now, most leaders would just launch attacks, try to take it by force, right?
Right, seems like the most straightforward approach.
But not Osman. He was more strategic. He befriended some of the local Byzantine leaders, even used one of their fortresses for storage.
Wow, so he was playing the long game, building relationships that would pay off later.
Precisely. He wasn't just conquering, he was creating alliances, weaving a web of influence.
And I bet his marriage to Sheikh Edebali's daughter was part of that strategy, right?
Oh, absolutely. That was a brilliant move. Sheikh Edebali was a powerful religious leader, a real influencer of his time.
So the marriage secured him powerful allies.
And it gave rise to one of the most famous legends of the Ottoman Empire. The story of Osman's dream.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this. Tell me everything. Was this a real dream, or was it, a cleverly crafted story?
That's the million-dollar question. The story goes that Osman was staying at Edebali's house and had this vivid dream.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He saw a crescent moon rising from the sheikh's chest and sinking into his own. Then this massive tree sprouted from his navel, its branches spreading out, covering the whole world, mountains, rivers, everything.
That's a pretty powerful image. What did Edebali make of it?
He interpreted it as a sign from God, a divine message that Osman was destined for greatness, that he and his descendants were chosen to rule a vast empire.
And I bet the marriage to his daughter was seen as a key part of fulfilling that destiny.
Oh, absolutely. It was like a match made in heaven, literally.
It's interesting how this dream conveniently justified their future conquests, right? It's like they had divine permission to expand.
Exactly. The story of Osman's dream became this powerful tool for legitimizing Ottoman rule. But of course, dreams alone can't build an empire.
You need real-world victories.
And Osman delivered those too. He was a man of action.
So let's talk about some of those key victories. Which ones stand out as major turning points in Osman's rise to power?
Well, one of his early victories, a real statement win, was at Karakazar in 1286. Not only did he capture the city, but he converted a church into a mosque.
A symbolic gesture showing who's in charge now.
Exactly. It was a clear sign of his growing power and the changing religious landscape of the region. And guess what? This victory caught the attention of the Seljuk Sultan.
The big boss himself.
Yep. He was so impressed with Osman's success that he showered him with gifts, gold, banners, drums, the whole 9 yards.
The symbols of a rising leader?
Exactly. It's important to remember that Osman was initially operating within the existing power structure. He was a vassal of the Seljuks, but his ambitions were clearly much greater.
So he was playing the game, but also getting ready to change the rules.
Now you're getting it. And then came the Battle of Bapheus in 1302. That was a real game changer. It was Osman's first truly decisive victory against the Byzantines, a real clash of titans.
And this is where the Ottomans went from being just another Beylik to a real force to be reckoned with.
That's right. Bapheus was a turning point. They were no longer just a local power. They were a rising empire.
But I imagine he still had enemies, people trying to stop him.
Oh, absolutely. The Byzantines were desperate to halt his advance. They even tried to form an alliance with the Mongols.
Whoa, the Mongols. That could have been disastrous for Osman.
You said it. Imagine those two powerhouses teaming up against him.
So, did they succeed? Were they able to stop him?
Luckily for Osman, no. The Mongols were dealing with their own internal struggles and couldn't fully commit to the alliance.
So, a bit of luck played a role.
Sometimes luck is just as important as skill in shaping history.
A lucky break for Osman, for sure. But what about Osman himself? Did he live to see his empire fully realized? What was his crowning achievement?
Well, Osman actually died in 1326.
So he didn't see the full extent of his legacy.
But shortly after his death, his forces captured the city of Bursa,
A major victory.
and it became the new Ottoman capital, a permanent symbol of their dominance in the region.
Wow, even in death, his vision continued to unfold, from obscure beginnings to the foundation of an empire that would change the world. Osman's story is truly incredible.
Absolutely. But you know what's really fascinating? For all his military and political accomplishments, there's a side of Osman that remains a complete mystery. The sources are almost totally silent on his personal life. What was he like as a man, beyond the battlefield? What were his motivations, his fears, his regrets? It's a real head-scratcher.
That's so intriguing. We've talked about Osman the leader, the conqueror, the empire builder, but what about Osman the person? Was that part of his story deliberately obscured or just lost to time?
It's a great question. And it's a reminder that even the most powerful figures are ultimately human. There's always more to the story, more to discover.
Well, we've certainly uncovered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. The origins of the Ottoman Empire, Osman's cunning strategies, and even some historical mysteries. And I can't wait to delve deeper into this story in our next part.
There's so much more to come. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and times of Osman I. In part one, we explored the chaotic world he was born into, his clever strategies, and his early wins on the battlefield. Now, I'm curious, what set him apart from all those other men in 13th century Anatolia? What made him not just a successful leader, but the founder of an empire that would last for centuries?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And I think it gets to the heart of what made Osman such a fascinating figure. It wasn't just his military skills or political savvy, it was how people saw him, the image that was built around him, both during his life and long after.
We talked about the possible fabrication of his family line and the strategic choice of the name Osman. Are you saying there was a deliberate effort to shape his image from day one?
Absolutely. One thing that really jumps out from the sources is how quickly Osman was elevated to near saintly status in Ottoman accounts. He's portrayed as this incredibly pious, just, and charismatic leader, almost a mythical figure destined for greatness.
So it wasn't enough for him to win battles and expand his territory. They needed to create a narrative, a legend that would justify his rule and inspire his followers. Fascinating how image-making played such a crucial role, even back then.
It's a timeless tactic, really. Leaders throughout history have understood the power of a good story. And speaking of powerful symbols, we can't talk about Osman's legacy without mentioning one of the most fascinating Ottoman traditions, the Sword of Osman.
Ah, yes, the legendary sword. You mentioned it briefly in part one. Was this an actual sword passed down through generations?
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. While there may have been a real physical sword, the Sword of Osman was primarily a symbolic idea, representing the Ottoman ruler's authority.
Okay, so more of a concept than a literal weapon. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this tradition and how it connected back to Osman himself.
So picture this. Each new Ottoman sultan, when they came to power, would participate in this elaborate ceremony where they were girded with the sword of Osman.
A symbolic passing of the torch, you could say.
Exactly. It was a highly ritualized event, full of religious and historical meaning. The idea was to connect each new sultan directly back to Osman, to that divine mandate he supposedly received in his dream.
So it wasn't just about the sword itself, it was about the act of being given the sword, the symbolism of inheriting Osman's authority and legitimacy. Brilliant way to solidify a dynasty's power.
Oh, absolutely. The Ottomans were masters of political theater. They knew that power isn't just about military strength. It's about perception, belief, and tradition. The Sword of Osman tradition was this visible link to their founder, a way to reinforce their right to rule for centuries.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What if Osman hadn't had that dream? Or if Sheikh Edebali hadn't interpreted it in such a favorable way? Would the Ottoman Empire have taken the same shape?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It's impossible to say for sure, of course, but it does highlight the role of chance, interpretation, and, yes, a bit of luck in shaping history.
Speaking of shaping history, let's switch gears for a moment and talk about Osman as a military leader. What can you tell us about his tactics? Did he have a signature style of warfare?
From what we can gather from accounts of battles like Bayfius, Osman seems to have favored speed and agility over brute force. He relied heavily on light cavalry, using swift attacks and the element of surprise to overwhelm his enemies.
So a kind of hit-and-run approach. It makes sense, given the terrain and the often shifting alliances of the region.
Precisely. He had to be adaptable, able to strike quickly and disappear before his enemies could regroup. It was a style of warfare that worked really well in the volatile environment of 13th century Anatolia.
It sounds almost like a medieval version of guerrilla warfare. Fascinating to see how he adapted his strategies to the challenges he faced.
It really shows his intelligence and flexibility as a military leader. He wasn't just a brave warrior, he was a cunning strategist who knew how to use his resources and the terrain to his advantage.
It's interesting to contrast that with the image of him as this almost saintly, pious ruler. Makes you wonder about the complexities of his character.
Which brings us back to that lingering question from part one, the mystery of Osman's personal life. What was he like behind the scenes, behind the carefully constructed image? Was there a disconnect between the man and the myth?
It's like the sources are deliberately avoiding that part of him. They tell us he was a great leader, a pious man, the founder of this incredible empire, and then just stop there.
Maybe there's a reason for that silence. Perhaps the details of his personal life didn't fit the narrative they were trying to create. Or maybe those details were simply seen as unimportant compared to his accomplishments.
So frustrating, isn't it? We have this larger-than-life figure who played such a crucial role in history, but we're left with these gaps in our understanding.
It's a good reminder that history is never truly complete. We're always piecing together fragments, interpreting evidence, and trying to make sense of the past. And sometimes those missing pieces are the most intriguing ones of all.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the life and legacy of Osman I. We've covered his cunning strategies, his battlefield successes, that carefully crafted image that solidified his dynasty's power. But now I'm curious about the impact, the ripple effect, you know? What did Osman's rule actually mean for the Ottoman Empire and the world as a whole?
That's the question, isn't it? It's something historians are still debating. Osman's time as leader, although relatively short, was a period of huge change, a real turning point. He laid the groundwork for what would become one of history's most powerful and long-lasting empires, an empire that would span continents and shape global events for centuries to come.
We've talked about his military skills, his political maneuvering, but were there other things, other aspects of his leadership that helped create this lasting impact?
One thing people often overlook is the role of religion. Remember, Osman was deeply influenced by Sufism.
Sufism.
Yeah, it's a mystical branch of Islam. It emphasizes personal experience, a direct connection with the divine. This spiritual grounding probably really shaped Osman's worldview, how he approached leadership.
So it wasn't just about conquering territory, expanding the empire. It was about building a society based on certain values. How did this Sufi influence show up in how he ruled?
Well, Sufism often encourages tolerance and inclusion, and we see hints of that in Osman's policies. He was known for his fair treatment of people who weren't Muslims, letting them practice their own religions. He even included them in his government. This kind of tolerance, at least in the early days of the empire, was really important for attracting all sorts of people, scholars, merchants, artisans. It added to the richness and growth of Ottoman society.
That's a great point. It wasn't just about brute force. It was about creating a system people wanted to be part of. A system with opportunity and a certain degree of religious freedom, which was pretty unusual for the time.
Exactly. And it's interesting to compare this inclusive approach to the Byzantine Empire. They were pretty rigid and oppressive. That contrast probably made Osman even more appealing to people looking for a more tolerant and dynamic place to live.
It's like the classic example of one empire's weakness becoming another's opportunity. But there were still military conquests, right? How did Osman balance this reputation for piety and tolerance with, well, the reality of expanding his territory through warfare?
That's where it gets complicated, where we have to think about how to interpret history. We can't forget the idea of jihad, often translated as holy war, played a big role in the medieval Islamic world. For many, spreading the realm of Islam was a religious duty, a way to bring justice and spread their faith.
So for Osman and his followers, conquest didn't clash with their faith. It was actually a way to fulfill it.
Right. And don't forget, this was an era of constant fighting, alliances changing all the time. Survival often meant you had to expand. We have to be careful not to judge historical figures solely through today's values.
It's a great point. History is full of nuance. Understanding the context of the time is so important. But even with that in mind, it's clear that Osman's actions had a huge impact on the course of history. He set off a chain of events that changed the political and cultural landscape of entire regions.
No doubt about it. And his influence didn't end with his death. The Ottoman Empire, the one he built the foundations for, would go on to be a major player in global trade, a center for learning, art, a real force in international relations. And it lasted for over 6 centuries.
That's incredible. It's amazing to think that this one figure, shrouded in mystery and legend, had such a massive role in shaping the world we live in today.
It really highlights how individual actions can have such a ripple effect, especially when they seize those opportunities and build something truly lasting. Osman's story reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of dates and battles. It's the choices, ambitions, even the contradictions of people who dared to dream big.
Beautifully put. We've delved into the birth of the Ottoman Empire, explored the myths and realities around its founder, and considered the long-lasting legacy he left. And even though we may never completely solve all the mysteries surrounding Osman Parv, I think we've gained a new appreciation for him, the times he lived in, the impact he made on the world.
It's been a fascinating journey. And personally, I always find it so rewarding to dig into these historical puzzles. Who knows what other discoveries are waiting for us as we keep exploring the past, piecing together the stories that help us understand the present.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been incredibly insightful.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.